As you know, we will talk about INF agreement.
Very good.
I'll start with general question. So during the Nuclear 5 meeting, it was in the end of January in Beijing, Russia and the US discussed this INF agreement. However, actually it turned out unsuccessful. So what should we expect now? Will the arms race start actually on shorter, medium-sized land-based rocket systems which were banned by this agreement?
Well, you know, I think it's too early to say that we're going to fall into an arms race at this point. What the United States has done is announced its intention to withdraw from the treaty, but the withdrawal doesn't take place for 6 months. So it's sometime in the summer, in August of this year, that the United States would formally withdraw from the treaty. But that's on the assumption that no deal is reached between the United States and Russia before then that would convince both sides that the other side is in compliance and therefore that they can continue with the treaty. So what I expect to happen is at the continuation of some negotiations to see if the United States and Russia can work out an acceptable agreement that would allow the treaty to be preserved. Again, if that doesn't happen, then the United States will withdraw at the end of 6 months.
Actually, what's an acceptable agreement for President Trump and its administration? What do you think about it?
Well, you know, what they have said officially is that they want Russia to acknowledge that a missile that it is developing and has deployed violates the parameters of the INF treaty, and therefore that Russia would agree to destroy those missiles to bring itself back into compliance. But as you know, the Russians also have a number of complaints about what the United States has done and believe that the United States has violated the treaty. What would have to happen for the treaty to be preserved is for the two sides to work out those the technical differences and agree that steps will be taken to bring each side in compliance to the satisfaction of the other. This is really a question of political will more than anything else. I have talked to a number of technical experts who believe there are technical fixes to these issues. The question is, what do the political leaders in both countries want to do?
So, what are actually President Trump and its administration's arguments to leave the agreement? What's the practical dimension of this decision?
Well, I mean, first, the position of the Trump administration is that Russia has developed a cruise missile that violates the parameters of the treaty. That they have raised this with the Russian side. The Russian side does not accept that judgment and has refused to destroy these. So they're in technical violation of the treaty from the American standpoint. That said, there are a number of other issues that have really factored into the way the United States looks at this treaty. First and foremost is the question of China. China does have weapon systems that fall within the parameters of the INF treaty and would be banned if China were party to that treaty. China is not. The United States is concerned about what China's intentions are over the longer term, and the administration would like to develop its own INF missile systems in order to deal with what they see as a rising Chinese threat.
So I would like also to ask about Russia's position. Actually, many say that Russia was also interested to break this agreement because they have some success to do such kind of rocket launch systems. So what do you think about it? Was Russia also interested to start making?
You know, when I worked in the Bush administration in the early 2000s, the Russians in fact came to us with concerns about the INF treaty, and were interested in either modifying or adjusting that treaty in some way, in part because they saw a growing threat to their east. China has, as I've already said, intermediate range ballistic missiles, but North Korea has those missiles, India, Pakistan, Iran, South Korea, and a number of other countries. And so Russia was concerned that its neighbors were developing missile systems that it was forbidden to develop, and therefore had come to us asking about a possible modification. At that time, we weren't interested. My guess is that even today, the Russian government is concerned about the development by other countries of these shorter-range ballistic missiles, that it would like to be out beyond the parameters of the IMF treaty. And although it is being quite vocal that the United States is the country to blame if this treaty disappears at this point, there are many forces inside Russia that would actually be happy to see the IMF treaty disappear.
Actually, does a break of this of the existing agreement mean the collapse of nuclear control system, total collapse of this system?
Well, look, I mean, this depends on what the governments in Moscow and Washington want to do over the longer term. There still is the New START that can be preserved and can be prolonged, although the Trump administration hasn't demonstrated any eagerness to move in that direction at this point. But the larger challenge is that the arms control regime needs to be rethought for the 21st century. The structure of the arms control regime is largely founded on a bipolar competition between Russia and the United States. That's the way it developed over the past 40 or 50 years. It was a system that was adequate to the times of the late Cold War in the early years of the post-Cold War period. But the strategic situation has changed dramatically over the past decade. We have a number of other countries that have developed nuclear weapons and are beginning to grow their arsenals. That's one. Two, conventional weapons have developed. They're now highly precise and can perform some of the tasks that only nuclear weapons could have a couple of decades ago. And of course, we also have the emergence of cyberspace as a domain of military competition. And cyberspace is an area in which many different countries can participate. And so the strategic equation is growing multipolar. And what we need to develop is a conception of strategic stability and an arms control regime that goes with that, that takes into account all these changes in the strategic realm. I think it's a tremendously complex intellectual and conceptual problem that we have to tackle. But if we're going to have a durable system of arms control in the 21st century, it's something that we will have to do. So the sooner we get engaged on thinking through what the challenges are, what the system could look like, having those discussions within the expert communities in both Russia and the United States and elsewhere, and eventually dialogue between Russia and the United States about modification of an arms control regime, about building a new arms control regime, the better off we're all going to be.
Do you think it's possible to include China and other nuclear powers in the new nuclear arms control system? Because the number of their nuclear missiles is much lower than the missiles that have Russia and the United States.
No, I understand that. They're significantly less. But remember, one of the goals of the non-proliferation regime is to reduce the nuclear arsenals of both the United States and Russia. And the limits down to which the United States and Russia can go do depend to a certain extent on the size of the arsenals of other countries. Other countries are modernizing and building up their systems. So you reach a point where the nuclear arsenal of China does become a factor that affects the balance between Russia and the United States in the nuclear realm. We may not be there now, but in a scenario where we want to reduce the arsenals of the United States and Russia, we could get there. Second, missile defense systems also factor into this. So there are a whole host of questions that affect the nuclear equation that need to be addressed in a comprehensive arms control regime, and also as we begin to reconceptualize strategic stability. At the end of the day, if we're going to have an effective arms control regime, China will have to be brought in some way. The Chinese themselves have been resistant to this idea, in part because they are still modernizing and growing their systems, not only on the nuclear side, but certainly in conventional weapons and in cyberspace. So it will take some time before we get or create the atmosphere in which we can finalize a new arms control regime. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't begin the process of thinking that through it at the present time.
So, and one more question about nuclear non-proliferation treaty. In 2020, there will be a big conference about this treaty. Do you think that does this treaty have the future in this critical situation?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. We still have a vital interest in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and that includes both the United States and Russia. Obviously, there's going to be some back and forth on this, given the state of U.S.-Russian relations. But my sense is that at the end of the day, the United States and Russia will decide that this treaty is in their interest, and they will try to find some way to make that regime work.
მადლობა რომ უყურეთ ამ ვიდეოს. გთხოვთ თქვენი მოსაზრებები და შეხედულებები დააფიქსიროთ კომენტარების სახით, ჩვენ მას აუცილებლად გამოეხმაურებით და გააგრძელეთ 42 პარალელის ყურება.